Welcome to another daily cinephile vlog. Today I am talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Yes, it's finally here after being announced 7 years ago. Yeah, I actually have on my Facebook page that I shared about this first getting announced 7 years ago for a 2019 release date. I only had to wait 7 years for that so-called 2019 release date to finally get here. But it's finally here, Dial of Destiny, the final Indiana Jones movie. And here's my thoughts. I should talk about the original films real quick since I've never really talked about them on my channel before. Raiders of the Lost Ark. A nearly perfect movie. About as perfect of a movie as you can get on a story level, on a just cinematic level. The way the movie is constructed, set design, characters, everything about it. It's nearly perfect. It's Steven Spielberg's best movie. Temple of Doom. Big step down from Raiders of the Lost Ark. Very weak story, very weak reason for Indiana Jones to get into the adventure that he's in, but at the same time, they have some great, fun new characters like Short Round and Willie. I do enjoy a lot of the set pieces in that movie, the production design, and a lot of the action set pieces. I think it's a fun movie, even if it's not as good as any of the other Indiana Jones movies. I think it's my least favorite of the franchise, but I still go back to it just as much as the other sequels. The Last Crusade, my second favorite in the franchise. You got Sean Connery as Indiana Jones' father. You have this artifact that I find the story of it to be very profound, and the way they have to get to it, and the fact that in the end, Indy has to save his father. Some of it, it's a little too similar to Raiders of the Lost Ark at time, especially with the locations that they go to. But overall, it's still a very effective movie, and a lot of people's favorites. I like that they add Sala and Marcus Brody to the group, so glad to see them on an adventure. Would have been a great final movie, but then you got Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I still think it's a great, fun movie. I think it's a little bit better than Temple of Doom. I think the story's a little bit better. I think there's some better pacing in there, and a lot of great different locations that they go to. One of the best looking movies of the 2000s. A great tribute to 50s sci-fi, alien, B-movies, and sci-fi television like Twilight Zone. Now we got Dial of Destiny. Now, the biggest problem with this movie is that Steven Spielberg was not returning. Unfortunately, he decided to drop out. They had James Mangold come in. I love James Mangold. James Mangold did Logan. He did Ford v Ferrari, which is one of the best movies of the past 5 years. So with James Mangold on board, that was the one piece that was still getting me very excited for the movie. When a lot of other people were kind of pushing it to the side, I thought James Mangold could really bring something new to this franchise. The movie is quite good. I had a lot of fun with this movie. There were a lot of times throughout the entire runtime that I was laughing, kind of shrieking, and like kind of really reacting to what was happening on screen. This movie's got some punch to it. This is the first one and the only one that you really feel Harrison Ford's age. Even more so than like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which makes sense. That was over 15 years ago now. But even more so than Force Awakens, which granted at this point, between the filming of this movie and Force Awakens, I think there was about 7 years there. But this one, you can really start to feel the age, and it plays into the movie. He's a bit of a reluctant hero at times. Like, he doesn't initially get involved in a way that is very optimistic. It doesn't seem like he wants to go, except for the fact that he needs to help his goddaughter. He feels compelled to help her. And the way it all happens is quite quick, but in the best kind of way. He's thrown into the action in a way that totally makes sense. The last few years of his life have been rough. He is retiring, and it seems like his life is kind of wrapping up while the rest of the world has moved on. You really feel that in the first few minutes. Granted, I think I could have used a little bit more of that. I think if they would have expanded on his whole viewpoint of life and what it's like to be an older man in a world that is jumping to the future. Literally, the moon landing is happening. So I think if they would have added a little more of that to the movie, it would have worked. But we really get the family side of Indiana Jones, which is like his family's been a little torn up, and he hasn't had a great relationship with his goddaughter. But due to sort of nefarious reasons, it's not for good intentions, his goddaughter gets involved with his life by basically trying to steal back this dial that her dad was obsessed with years prior. Only to sell it. She just wants to sell it. But unfortunately, there's also ex-Nazis involved. Well, they're current Nazis, but you know, they're probably not getting paid to be Nazis anymore. It's actually the Nazis from Operation Paperclip. And they're also on the trail of this goddaughter, Helena Shaw. I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a lot of fun in the role. She's not a perfect character. She's very flawed. She's had a lot of messes in the past, but she has this sort of upbeat personality, kind of gives no shit sort of mentality. Probably very similar to what an Indiana Jones. It's probably similar to what Indiana Jones was when he was younger, prior to Raiders of the Lost Ark. And she's very funny and at times maybe steals the show, but she never takes over. She never takes anything away from Indiana Jones, and there's not much for like cheap jokes going his way or cheap references. I think it's all played very naturally and very fun, and it's great to see. The villain, I think, by Mads Mikkelsen, is a good villain. The voice of a villain, the look of a villain. But at the same time, compared to the Nazis from the previous movies, I think he might be actually the worst one. Only because the other Nazis were always about just getting these artifacts and kind of taking advantage of Hitler's reign as a way to obtain their own power. That's the same thing with this villain, but you also actually see the oppressive nature of the Nazis within him. There's a scene early in the movie where he's just talking to this guy who brought food to their hotel, and the things he's saying, you could tell right away, it's like, oh man, he is a racist dude. He's definitely that kind of Nazi, and he wants to bring that kind of Nazism back. That is exactly his goal in this movie, is to bring the Third Reich back in all the worst ways. Not the sort of power that you saw in like Raiders of the Lost Ark. No, they're like really trying to make these like the very bad type of Nazis that we historically know about. So in a way, I'm like, yeah, this is almost the worst. This is probably the worst of the bunch so far. Mads Mikkelsen isn't given much to do beyond that, but he does a great job because it's Mads Mikkelsen. I love the sidekicks that he has. I think they're a great group. They're a rough group. And there's a lot of back and forth between the heroes and the villains. You know, this is probably the closest to Raiders of the Lost Ark in the way that the villains and the heroes have this back and forth of getting the MacGuffin, kidnapping. They might go a little too far with that at a certain point. Maybe that's because the movie is a little longer than the previous movies. This is 2.5 hours long. I never felt like it dragged. There was a point where I was like, oh man, how many more minutes are in this movie? But I realized that the third act was actually beginning. I was like, oh, we're already here. So maybe it's not as long as I thought it was going to be. This is actually keeping things going pretty well. And I think this has the strongest story since Raiders of the Lost Ark. In the sense that it has the most compelling reason for Indiana Jones to get involved in the adventure. He's kind of almost forced to do the adventure, but in a very natural way, in a very fun way. Keeps the energy going. It never gets lazy with the mystery either. I feel like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull and even The Last Crusade, like there's a character that appears that just helps Indiana Jones and gives all the details of what he's supposed to do beyond a certain point. Like Last Crusade, the diary had everything for Indiana Jones to do and how he's supposed to get to where he's got to go, but he had to do a little bit of work in that movie. Crystal Skull's a little worse because you have this Oxley character that basically has everything written down and spelled out for Indiana Jones. They have to do this weird mind connection thing in order to get it out of Oxley, but after that he tells him exactly how to get to the temple, how to get in there, what to do. To me, it wasn't very mysterious or adventurous. With this movie, they have to figure everything out pretty much the entire time, and I think it was easy to follow, but also it kept the mystery going. I didn't quite know how things were always going to line up, and the villains were always like one step behind them in a very Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of way. So to me, I think it's a very strong story. The opening few minutes, I think, is going to be everyone's favorite scene just because we do get to see a younger Indiana Jones during the war. Something I was really hoping to see after Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I mean, we hear about this guy. He won so many medals. I'd like to see him actually during that period in the war, and we actually get to see it here. It's a great long action sequence, maybe a little too long. Maybe they didn't have to go on for as long as they did, but it's a great way to introduce both the villain, reintroduce Indiana Jones and introduce his friend to the franchise. And I think it's a great few minutes. Unfortunately, the effects on his face are not all that great. The de-aging technology is just not there. It's been better in some other movies, and it's just not so good here. I think that's an issue going on with the industry as a whole right now. I think there's like an issue with how they're accomplishing effects. I think VFX departments are just getting overrun. I definitely think that these studios are probably expecting way too much out of them. And there's a lot of moments in this movie that it does feel digital, like some of the creepy crawlies. There's creepy crawlies in this movie like the other Indiana Jones movies, and like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, they're computer animation. I think they're better looking effects than Kingdom of the Crystal Skull sometimes, but at other times I feel like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is a better looking movie than this movie. There's some scenes that look very digital, that like it's shot on the green screen, but then there's other times where you could tell they actually went to the locations. And I haven't seen a blockbuster like this in quite a while where you can actually tell that they went to these different countries. They actually shot on location. Maybe the Mission Impossible movies, but besides those, a lot of other movies you can tell they always green screen it. And this movie does sort of a mix. Sometimes they're on the set, but then sometimes they do green screen and it looks not also great. Sometimes it works. But I appreciate that the movie doesn't look like orange throughout. A lot of recent blockbusters, Quantumania, Flash, Multiverse of Madness, they've like looked orange. Now they're going for like this orange color scheme and it's getting very ugly looking. This movie doesn't look like that. This movie does look good, but it doesn't look as good as Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which came out 15 years prior, on a cinematography level and on some of the effects level at times. It's weird. I'm gonna have to watch this at home at some point and compare it to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, because I feel like the movie that came out 15 years prior might look a little better. I think that might also be because Spielberg wasn't involved. I do kind of wonder what sort of visual flair Spielberg would have brought to this movie. If you've seen The Fabelmans and West Side Story, it shows that Spielberg still got it. It's unfortunate that he wasn't in on this movie. I do love James Mangold. I thought he was a great second choice for this franchise, and I don't think he ruins the visuals of the Indiana Jones franchise. I think he tries to match what was done in the original trilogy, and most of the time succeeds, but there's just those odd moments where I don't think it works all that well. And some of the some of the shots, like there's not like a shot in this movie that I can think of and take home with me and be like, that was a great little shot, which is rare for an Indiana Jones movie. When Indiana Jones is filled with memorable looking shots, little moments that you could tell went from storyboard to film. I didn't feel that as much with this movie, but there's still some great action sequences, even if the movie and those sequences maybe go on a little too long. And I do feel like they could have spent more time dealing with Indiana Jones' age, since that was the main purpose of this movie. I think it's just kind of tough to pull off when you're not doing a passing of the torch type of movie. That's not what this movie is. I think with Force Awakens and Creed, movies like that almost benefit from being a passing of the torch movie, because there's just there's a framework for that type of movie, and it's a compelling type of story to watch. Whereas with this, and I don't want to see a passing of the torch movie with an Indiana Jones flick, but I think it's a little tougher then to make a story about just, he's older now, and where do you go from there? And there's a moment towards the end of the film where you think they're going to do something very profound, but they kind of walk it back. They decide not to go the route that I thought they were going to go in, and instead it feels like the last few minutes then were shot after the fact. It feels like they reshot the ending, changed the ending, and the way that the ending scene goes, I thought it was fine. I thought it was a sweet note to end the franchise on, but it does happen pretty quickly compared to the climax that we just saw. So I have to question if they reshot that, and my money is yes, they probably did, and I'd like to see what exactly they reshot. There's definitely moments that they could cut out, but man, when they know how to make an Indiana Jones movie, they go full force. They have everything that you love out of the franchise, with all the different characters getting into hijinks and just these little backstories that are sort of spilled through as the movie goes along, and you see these characters that we've never met before but have a past with a different character, and they're just there to chase this character. Meanwhile, you got these other characters chasing the characters, and it's just so much fun. There's so much. It is a fun movie, and I don't think the energy really ever dies. I think it keeps things going. But I don't think Harrison Ford was able to do nearly as much as he could with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which is understandable. You definitely feel his age here, and I think that's just going to be it's a matter of what you want to see, because I've heard people joke about it in the past, like I don't want to see an old Indiana Jones, but people made that joke with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and I thought he was very flexible in that movie. This one, I don't think so as much. I think that climax might throw some people off. Like if you thought Kingdom of the Crystal Skull's climax went a little too far, I wonder what people are going to think of this one, because to me, this goes even further. I didn't think it didn't throw me off. Like, I didn't think it ruined anything or that it was bad. I actually quite enjoyed it. It's not the type of karma that the villains received in the other movies. It's not like people's heads are exploding or melting or anything like that. But something happens to the villains that I think it's still pretty funny. Like, the whole thing that happens, to me, I was laughing, but in the best kind of way. I wasn't laughing that it was a bad scene. I was laughing because, like, man, this is just hilarious, the situation you're getting into, and the way that Mads Mikkelsen and the other villains are responding to the situation. It plays it very well. So overall, I give this like 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think it's my least favorite of the franchise right now, but I'd have to watch it again. Maybe I will think it's better than Temple of Doom the next time I watch it. I definitely will be coming back to this one, though. Just like the other ones. I think it fits neatly with the other ones, even if it's going to end up being the black sheep of the franchise. I think the biggest thing is that, like, when Steven Spielberg made Indiana Jones movies, he was making tributes to the time periods that they were set in. The original trilogy, he was paying tribute to 30s serials and adventure flicks. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, he was paying tribute to 50s cinema, alien movies, B movies, sci-fi movies, and even sci-fi television with like Twilight Zone. But then you got like this movie, which James Mangold was making an Indiana Jones movie, which has Nazis, the whip, different countries and locations, airplanes, all that different stuff. But it's like, to me, though, that's not Indiana Jones necessarily. You also have to throw in the tributes to cinema of the past, and that didn't really happen with this movie. It's not like it's paying tribute to 1960s cinema, which I don't think would be an easy feat. I don't know if 1960s cinema has as neat of an identity for Indiana Jones to fit in that the other movies had. And then some people would argue that like Indiana Jones didn't fit with the 50s vibe either, but to me, though, I thought they did such a good job of paying tribute to that era that it all worked. With this movie, I don't know how you fit it into, like, what would that be like? It's just before the movie brats were coming in, so like what, New Hollywood, you would have had movies like Midnight Cowboy and French Connection, but I guess there was also like Hammer horror flicks and some different kaiju movies coming out at the time. Maybe not all of them were released in America, unfortunately, so I guess I don't know exactly what you would have done for paying tribute to that era of movie and television. I would have to do more research in order to even figure that out, but it's not as quickly identifiable to me as it was with like the 50s or 1930s cinema, serials, the types of media that was coming out during that time. So I think it would have been a tough feat, but they definitely don't even attempt it. They don't try to do that at all. They're just making an Indiana Jones movie. And to me, that's the biggest difference between James Mangold and Steven Spielberg. On top of the fact that, you know, this just doesn't have that same visual flair, unfortunately. But I still think it fits with the series and the way that the character is told. This has the most character arc that we've seen from Indiana Jones since The Last Crusade. And I think it ends things on a very sweet note. I'll have to see what my thoughts are when I expand them after a rewatch, but let me know what you thought of the movie in the comments below. I just had a few little nitpicks. These are such tiny little details, but it doesn't really spoil anything. I didn't like that they didn't have the years shown in subtitles. They didn't have the years or the location of the movie. They usually have that in all the other movies, but they didn't have it in this one. They also didn't do the Paramount Mountain transition. You're probably thinking, well, Paramount had nothing to do with this movie. But Paramount's logo is still in the movie. I think they have some kind of deal with Disney where they still retain some sort of distribution, maybe internationally, or they're receiving some kind of credit for the movie. I don't know. But because of that, since the Paramount logo's in there, you also get the Disney logo in there. I'm sure because they don't want to just have just the Paramount logo in there, because usually they only have the Lucasfilm logo in there. But now they can't do that because you also throw the Paramount logo. So then they also throw the Disney logo, and the point is they don't do a Paramount Mountain transition. They instead do a Lucasfilm transition, which like the little square piece for Lucasfilm becomes like a lock on a door. And I was like, that was fine, but why couldn't you do the mountain transition? And my only theory is that because at some point I'm guessing that Paramount logo will be dropped from the film in like future digital releases or whatever, because I'm guessing that Paramount is not going to retain that, not even ownership, but like whatever deal that they have with Disney. I'm sure that that doesn't last forever, so that logo will be dropped at some point. So they probably couldn't do a Paramount logo because it wouldn't be able to stay there forever. Also, I felt like maybe the MacGuffin, which wasn't a religious artifact, which I think is okay, but it's like does make it different from the other movies in a sense. But the artifact, you just gotta watch the last few minutes of the movie, but just notice where the artifact is, and then think about where the other artifacts are in the other movies. Because in a way, I'm like, I think they kind of broke the Indiana Jones code, in a sense. Let me know what you think, if you guys can figure out what I'm talking about. But I feel like they broke it a little bit, and I'm like, you're not supposed to do that in an Indiana Jones movie. I mean, the MacGuffin still screws everything up. It doesn't work out the way the villains think it's going to work out. But also, just watch the last few minutes, see exactly where that artifact is. I think they broke it. Also, I thought they weren't going to do the map sequences for a second, you know, where the plane flies around and then you see the map, because they literally didn't do it for one of the plane flying scene transitions. But then they do it later, but they really stylized it to the point where they made it stick out from the other movies, and I didn't think that was necessary. I think they should have just stuck to the traditional way it was done, just to match the earlier movies. But then again, these are all nitpicks. Overall, had a lot of fun with the movie.